The chalk snapped in half in Professor Alistair Finch's hand, the sound like a gunshot in the dead, silent lecture hall. A fine white dust settled on the cuff of his perfectly pressed charcoal suit. 200 students held their breath. He never lost his composure. Ever. Professor Finch was a legend at Blackwood University, and not just because he looked like he'd stepped out of a tailored academic daydream. He was the youngest ever holder of the chair of classical literature, a man whose intellect was as formidable as his presence. His lectures on Homeric epic were performances of fierce, controlled passion. He was discipline personified, and he had just been publicly, utterly derailed. It wasn't a phone ringing or a student snoring. It was a drawing. From his perch at the central dais, his storm-gray eyes, usually scanning the amphitheater for inattentiveness, had been caught by a flash of movement in the third row. A student, unlike the others frantically scribbling notes, was drawing. His head was bent, a lock of unruly chestnut hair falling across his forehead, his hand moving with a swift, sure grace over a large sketchpad. This in itself was not unusual. Students doodled. But Alistair, mid-explanation of Achilles' tragic rage, found his attention snagged. He was describing the precise moment Patroclus dons Achilles' armor, an act of love and hubris that will doom him, and he saw the student's hand fly across the page, not with idle doodles, but with intent. He was capturing the scene. Alistair's words faltered. He lost his place. The intricate thread of his argument unraveled. His hand, gripping the chalk too tightly, performed the small, violent breakage. A faint pink blush crept up his neck. He carefully placed the chalk fragments on the lectern. "The moment is one of intimate tragedy," he continued, his voice miraculously steady, betraying none of the internal earthquake. Patroclus, in wearing the armor, embodies his love for Achilles, but also seals his fate. The line between devotion and disaster is perilously thin. As he spoke, his eyes remained fixed on the young man. The student chose that moment to look up, as if feeling the weight of the professor's gaze. His eyes were the color of warm amber, and they held a spark of intelligent curiosity, not fear. He hadn't been caught. He'd been seen. A faint, apologetic smile touched his lips before he looked back down, his hand still moving. Alistair Finch, for the first time in his adult life, had to fight to remember his next line. After the lecture, the usual small crowd gathered around the dais, with questions. Alistair answered on autopilot, his mind elsewhere. As the hall emptied, he saw the student, Leo Moreau, his memory supplied, a sophomore, lingering by the exit, looking uncertain. Alistair pretended to organize his notes until they were the last two people in the vast, echoing room. "Mr. Moreau," he said, his voice cooler than he intended. Leo approached, clutching the sketchpad to his chest like a shield. "Professor Finch, I'm really sorry. I know I shouldn't." What was so compelling that it warranted ignoring the Iliad? Alistair interrupted. Leo hesitated, then turned the sketchpad around. Alistair's breath caught. It wasn't a doodle. It was a stunning, evocative charcoal drawing. It depicted Achilles, not as a raging warrior, but as a young man. His face, a mask of anguish and love, gently fastening the greaves on Patroclus's calves. The focus was on their hands. Achilles strong and trembling, Patroclus's resting on his friend's shoulder in a gesture of unbearable tenderness. The background was merely suggested, smoky and impressionistic, making the intimate moment stark and powerful. It was, Alistair realized with a jolt, a more insightful interpretation of the text than any essay he'd read that year. I just see it when you talk," Leo said, his voice soft. "The words make pictures in my head. I have to get them out, or I'll forget." Alistair was at a loss. The anger was gone, replaced by a profound and unsettling curiosity. "You have a remarkable talent," he said finally, the praise feeling foreign on his tongue. But this is a literature seminar, not an art studio. Your essay on the same topic was due a week ago and I have yet to see it. Talent without discipline is merely potential. Leo's shoulders slumped slightly. I'm working on it, sir. It's just the words don't come as easily as the pictures. Then you must learn to make them come, Alistair said, a decision forming in his mind, a decision that felt both professional and dangerously personal. Your potential is too significant to waste. You will bring me a draft. Tomorrow, my office, 4 p.m., and you will be on time. Leo's amber eyes widened, but he nodded. Yes, sir. And so it began. The next day, at 4:02 p.m., a hesitant knock sounded on Alistair's office door. Enter. Leo slipped in, looking like a storm cloud had personally dressed him. His shirt was rumpled, his jacket was vintage and slightly frayed, and he carried a battered leather satchel overflowing with books and papers. He was a whirlwind of chaotic energy in Alistair's sanctuary of order, a room of floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a heavy oak desk, and the faint, comforting scent of old paper and sandalwood. The essay draft was, as expected, a disaster. The ideas were brilliant, insightful, connecting the themes of love and fate in the Iliad to modern tragedies in a way that was unique and powerful. But the structure was non-existent, the arguments meandered, and it was riddled with grammatical errors. Alistair took out his red pen. Sit, he commanded. For an hour he tore the essay apart, not with malice but with surgical precision. He explained thesis statements, topic sentences, the architecture of a persuasive argument. Leo listened, initially defensive, then with dawning understanding. He asked sharp, intelligent questions. The boy's mind was as quick and creative as his hand. Discipline is not the enemy of creativity, Mr. Moreau, Alistair said, leaning back in his leather chair. It is its channel. The banks of a river do not hinder the water. They give it direction and power. Your ideas are the water. You need to build the banks. Leo looked at him, a new light in his eyes. No one's ever put it like that before. Here, same time next week, with a revised draft. The weekly sessions became their anchor. Alistair's Thursdays began to revolve around 4 p.m. He would find himself preparing for them, choosing specific texts to discuss, thinking of ways to challenge Leo's unconventional mind. He started keeping a second cup of coffee on his desk because he'd noticed Leo liked it with 2 sugars and a splash of cream. He learned about Leo. He was an art scholarship student. His parents thought a literature degree was impractical. He lived off campus in a tiny apartment that was probably a fire hazard, and he saw the world in a series of interconnected images and emotions that Alistair, with his linear, logical mind, found fascinating. Leo, in turn, seemed to thrive under the structure. His essays improved dramatically. He started contributing more in class, his comments sharp and perceptive. But he always brought his sketch pad, and sometimes, at the end of a session, he would show Alistair what he'd drawn during the week. A study of the gargoyles on the library roof, a portrait of an old woman feeding pigeons in the quad. Each one was a window into how Leo saw the world, with a compassionate, unfiltered clarity that left Alistair quietly awestruck. Alistair began to crave those moments. He found himself looking for Leo on campus, his heart giving a small, inexplicable leap when he spotted the familiar, messy hair and confident slouch. He memorized the cadence of his laugh, the way he gestured with his hands when he talked about something he loved. The disciplined walls Alistair had built around his life, around his heart, were developing cracks, and something bright and wild was beginning to grow through them. He knew it was wrong. He was 32. Leo was 19. He was the professor. The power dynamic was absolute and non-negotiable. His career, his reputation, Leo's future, everything was at stake. He tried to clamp down, to be colder, more professional, but it was like trying to hold back the tide. The crisis point came on a rainy Thursday in November. Leo arrived for his session soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead, his eyes red-rimmed. He'd gotten a letter. His scholarship for the next semester was in jeopardy due to his earlier poor grades in other classes. His father had called, telling him it was time to get real and come home to work in the family business. "He thinks art is a hobby," Leo said, his voice thick with a despair that made Alistair's chest ache. "He thinks this," he gestured around at the books, at himself, "is a waste of time." He looked so young, so defeated, sitting in the armchair dripping onto the Persian rug. The confident artist was gone, replaced by a scared boy. Without thinking, Alistair rose from his desk. He crossed the room and knelt in front of Leo's chair. He placed a hand on his shoulder. The damp wool of his jacket was cool under his palm. "Look at me," Alistair said, his voice low and intense. Leo raised his head. The vulnerability in his eyes was devastating. "What you can do," Alistair said, his grip tightening. "What you see, what you create. It is not a waste. It is a gift. Your father's inability to see its value does not diminish it. Do you understand me?" He was too close. He could see the individual droplets of water on Leo's skin, the dark sweep of his lashes, the perfect curve of his mouth. The air between them crackled with a tension that had been building for months. Alistair's own discipline, the very thing that defined him, was screaming at him to retreat. But his heart, a muscle he had long thought atrophied, was pounding a frantic, undeniable rhythm. Leo's gaze dropped to Alistair's lips for a heartbeat, then flicked back to his eyes. "Alistair," he whispered, the sound of his name on Leo's lips was his undoing. For one terrifying, glorious second, he thought he would close the distance. He would taste the rain on his skin. The want was a physical pain. With a Herculean effort, Alistair withdrew his hand as if burned. He stood up, putting the solid bulk of his desk between them, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Your potential is your responsibility," he said, his voice strained, forcing it back into a professional register. It sounded hollow, even to him. "You will not squander it. You will draft an appeal for your scholarship. I will review it. Now, go home and get dry." The hurt and confusion in Leo's eyes would haunt him for weeks. But he had held the line. The following sessions were strained, filled with a new, awkward tension. Alistair buried himself in being the exacting teacher, focusing only on the work. Leo, in turn, became quieter, more reserved. He stopped showing Alistair his sketches. Alistair felt the loss like a physical ache. He had done the right thing, the disciplined thing, and in doing so, he had extinguished the very light that had drawn him in. The end of the semester arrived. Leo's final project was not an essay, but a request to submit a visual piece with an accompanying artist's statement for his final grade. Alistair, against his better judgment, agreed. The day of the final presentations, the department held a small exhibition. Alistair moved through the crowd of students and faculty, his heart heavy. He felt Leo's absence keenly, though he knew he would be there. Then he saw it. On a central display panel was Leo's work. It was a large, breathtaking mixed-media piece titled "The River and the Banks." It depicted two figures from behind, standing at the edge of a brilliantly rendered river. The water was a chaotic, beautiful swirl of ink and acrylic, full of leaping fish and hidden depths, a torrent of pure, untamed creativity. But the banks of the river were meticulously drawn in fine-point pen, strong, geometric, and perfectly structured. They weren't confining the water, they were guiding it, giving it form and purpose. The water, in turn, eroded and shaped the banks in places, softening their lines, making them more beautiful. They were interdependent, essential to one another. It was a love letter. Not of romance, but of profound understanding and gratitude. It was Leo saying, "I see you. I see what you did for me." And you were right. Alistair stood before it, utterly transfixed, his vision blurred. He felt a presence beside him. You said the banks give the river its power, Leo said softly, not looking at him. I wanted to show that the river gives the banks their meaning. Alistair could not speak. He could only look from the masterpiece to the artist who had created it. Leo looked older, more grounded. The discipline had taken root. There are no words, Leo, he finally managed, his voice thick. I got the scholarship, Leo said. The appeal worked, and my dad, he saw this. He didn't say much, but he shook my hand. He finally turned to look at Alistair, his amber eyes clear and steady. You gave that to me. You gave me the discipline to fight for it. The air between them was thick with everything that was and everything that could never be. The love was there in the space between them, acknowledged without a single word being spoken. Alistair wanted to tell him that Leo had given him far more in return, a glimpse of a world seen through more passionate, more beautiful eyes. He had cracked open his disciplined heart and made him feel alive. But he was the professor, the adult, the architect of those banks. He offered a small, sad, infinitely proud smile. You did that, Leo, he said, his voice steady with a hard-won resolve. You built those banks. You channeled the river. You did the work. He looked at the painting one last time, imprinting it on his soul. Now go. Your future is waiting, and it is going to be extraordinary. He saw the understanding dawn, in Leo's eyes, followed by acceptance. This was the final lesson, the discipline of the heart. Letting go. Leo nodded slowly. Thank you, Professor Finch, he said. The title was a boundary and a term of deepest respect. Then he turned and walked away, into the crowd, into his future. Alistair did not watch him go. He looked back at the painting, at the perfect, impossible balance of wild creativity and loving discipline. He had taught Leo about structure, and Leo in turn had taught him that the deepest discipline sometimes is to love something enough to let it flow freely, even if it breaks your heart. It was the most profound love story he would ever know, and its beauty would sustain him for a lifetime.